I was lucky enough to be invited to the home of Blasphemous, Seville, and get hands-on with the game itself at a preview event. Not only that, but I got to participate in a Q&A with the devs. And finally, I had the privilege of having a sit-down with the lead level designer and one of the producers to pick their brains. So in this video, we will not only be showing gameplay, but also diving into some insights from the devs themselves. But yeah, I'm really excited to show you some of this incredible game. In regards to spoilers, there will be some visual spoilers throughout, as I will be showing some new concept art and in general some unedited gameplay in the background. But for those who care more about the lore, and specifically just don't want that to be spoiled, I will give a clear warning when we are about to discuss my new insights into the lore from my hour with the game. But in general, there will be visual spoilers throughout this video, so this is your last warning. So of course what everyone is interested in is the gameplay itself, and so I will start with the hands-on time I got with the game. I played the game for about 1 hour, and by God was it a wonderful hour. I can tell you from what I've played, this game is looking incredible. It was extremely polished, had beautiful cinematics, the combat was great, and it had even more advanced platforming and engaging lore. This will be my game of the year, I have no doubt about that. The footage I am showing in the background, the gameplay, is not mine. Team 17 have provided us with some B-roll, but it is from the same point of the early part of the game that I got to play, and so it is representative of my experience. As I mentioned in the introduction, I did actually get to sit down and discuss the game with 2 members of the Game Kitchen dev team. That is Enrique, the lead level designer, and Raquel, a member of the production team. In this discussion, they were able to give me greater insights into the game itself, and so as we discuss my experience, I will provide further context from those 2 devs as well. For people who are new to Blasphemous and maybe want a quick rundown on what this game is all about, it is the sequel to a 2D Metroidvania game, set in a dark and unforgiving world that is influenced by Andalusian culture. The first game was very combat heavy, with some platforming and exploration, but the sequel promises to take the traversal and exploration to the next level, whilst also making the combat far more robust. The game is of course lauded not only for its weighty combat, but also its stunning art, incredible music, and haunting lore. Our 1 hour of gameplay with Blasphemous 2 started at the beginning of the game, where you have a cinematic and are then immediately confronted with a choice, and this choice has me most excited about the game. You get to choose your first weapon. Now, we have all seen the 3 weapons in the various trailers, the praying blade, the war censer, and of course the rapier and dagger. These 3 weapons are presented to you at the beginning of the game, and you get to try each of them out before making a choice about which one you will start the game with. When I asked Enrique and Raquel what they are most excited about in Blasphemous 2, it was the weapons and what they give to the gameplay, but also this choice and the impact it can have on the player's journey. Now, as my good friend the Lore Hunter predicted in a video breaking down the trailer, these weapons not only make the combat more robust by having different playstyles, but they also play a prominent role in the game's traversal. For example, in my playthrough, I came across a big bell that seemed to control a door, but I was unable to ring this bell with my praying blade. But if I had the war censer, I would have been able to. And later on I also came across a blue chain, which I couldn't pass through. Now you can see how both of these obstacles work in the trailer, with the Penitent One using the censer to ring the bell, and the rapier using a dash to pass through the blue chains. So both of these weapons are traversal options for these specific obstacles. So again, well done to Lore Hunter for spotting this, even in the trailer. Now, with the weapons playing a role in traversal in mind, think about that first choice. You get to choose which weapon you have at the beginning of the game. That means you are choosing which traversal options are open to you in the opening hours of the game. This means that no 2 runs will ever be the same, and the paths you can take in the first few hours are altered radically based on this one single choice. And so while I chose the praying blade and wasn't able to pass through the bell doors some of the other attendees did choose the sensor and were able to pass through those doors. When I discussed our game experience with the other attendees, and we discussed where we had reached by the end of our 1 hour, we thought we were all making things up. I ended up in a sandy area, but someone else had ended up in a lake with ghosts, while someone else had ended up deep in the sewers. And I can't help but think that all our different weapon choices had a role to play in where we all ended up. This is what the dev team are really excited about, seeing what each player chooses, how their journey goes differently from other players, and what tactics speedrunners can use to maximize efficiency by making certain choices. Choosing different paths and doing things in a different order was always present in Blasphemous, but it feels far more pronounced now, starting with that very first choice in the opening moments of the game. You do of course earn all weapons eventually, but it is incredible to think that such a meaningful choice and trust in player agency happens in the first moments of the game, and I really do applaud the game devs for this choice. It is something very exciting. But talking about traversal, it isn't just limited to the weapons. I did also unlock a separate traversal ability early on, and this is one they have mentioned in their Twitter, the Ivy of Ascension, which is essentially a wall climb. So I do wonder if you will be granted other abilities that are separate from the weapons throughout the game. I guess time will tell how many more abilities and how deep the traversal goes, but the devs made it clear in both the Q&A and my discussions with them that making the traversal system more robust and more part of the core gameplay was definitely an aim with the sequel. And from the hour that I played, the traversal certainly was already far more varied and far more enjoyable. So this new traversal system has been baked in as part of the core identity of the sequel and its multiple weapons, blending both combat and platforming into a symbiotic whole. So expect more Metroidvania elements in Blasphemous 2. Oh, and one more thing, I did hit the spikes once in my time with the sequel, and good news everyone, no more insta-death like in Blasphemous 1. I just hit the spikes, the screen went black, I lost some health, and I respawned at the point I fell from. And given that traversal looks to be more intense in this game, this is a welcome change. And so, at the weapon choice, I did choose the Praying Blade, the most balanced weapon in the game. I do like a more kind of average and balanced playstyle when I'm first trying out a game. And then I took on the first boss of the game. And this is the red masked wheel wielding boss that you see a glimpse of in the trailer. It's a very balanced and very fair and very fun first boss, and I really enjoyed facing off against them and really shaking off the cobwebs. You have to use dodging, sliding and jumping to get around their attacks, but once you get the rhythm of it, you'll have no problem in taking down this boss. Once this boss is defeated, you meet an important NPC and get a cinematic that tells you what's going to happen throughout your journey, but we'll get into that in the lore section. Then you pass through a kind of tutorial area with basic platforming and some basic enemies, reminiscent of the Holy Line in Blasphemous 1. And once you've cleared that, you enter the game's new central town. You meet some core NPCs, and then you are off, and the game opens up. So with that said, let us talk about the combat itself. And while it feels very similar to the first game, it is clear that the Penitent One has a far bigger arsenal than prior games. Dodging and parrying feel as good as before, and I can confirm that the Praying Blade at least did appear to have a block window for less than perfect timed parries. And again, this was something that was kind of alluded to in the trailer, when you could see the Penitent One blocking more than one hit from certain enemies. But yeah, what can I say? I was a big fan of combat in Blasphemous 1, and this is just more of the same but far, far better, crunchier, and with more variety. Prayers return from Blasphemous 1, which is essentially spells for those who don't know, but they're also joined by chants. Now prayers are like the ones in Blasphemous 1, an instant use power that uses up some fervour, but then there are chants, and these are ones that require longer cast times, a heavier fervour cost, but seem to have longer lasting and more devastating effects. I did gain access to one of these chants in my time with the game, and it was like a fiery spell that did an AoE attack in front of you. It was closest to Verdiel's of the Forsaken Hamlet from Blasphemous 1, in that it set the ground on fire, and lingers for a long time doing some tremendous damage for enemies caught up in it. And given I only tried out one of the chants and prayers, I'm really excited to see what the game kitchen has in store for us in regards to these spells. Each of the 3 weapons has a skill tree that you can unlock after acquiring a certain item from an NPC. And while I didn't get to interact with this skill tree a lot, from the additional movesets I opened up with the Praying Blade, I can only imagine how much the Penitent One will have in his arsenal by the end of the game, when he's maxed out all 3 skill trees for each of the weapons. And so already, with the additional traversal options, the 3 different weapons, and prayers and chants, you can see that the Penitent One has a lot more in his arsenal than he did in the first game. And this was something that Enrique says the team was aware of, and they wanted to have combat with a greater depth than before to counter the Penitent One's increased power. We discussed the arenas in Blasphemous 1 that were unlocked by destroying the Confessor statues, and something you needed to do to get one of the endings in the game. In the base game, these represented the pinnacle of combat, with the difficulty of this combat coming from the different combinations of enemies found in these challenges, with their moves complementing each other, where they push you around the arena and you had to focus each target individually. And this was something the team wanted to explore more in Blasphemous 2, especially with the Penitent One getting some serious upgrades. And I definitely experienced this in my hands-on. The stone sarcophagus enemies are back, but instead of me being able to duel them one at a time, you often found yourself harassed by a floating skull lantern guy, who fires fireballs from afar while you're trying to parry the enemy in front of you. I personally really like this change, as there are plenty of ways to deal with this. You can dodge, hit, or parry these fireballs to defend yourself, or you can just chase down the skull guy before you take on the rest of the enemies. So prepare for more pairing up of complementary enemy types when playing Blasphemous 2. So there's another part of the game I'd like to discuss, and that was the Altarpiece of Favours, which as far as I could see will be replacing the Rosary system, but don't quote me on that, they could still be in the game. But essentially they play the same role. In the main town hub you meet a sculptor, an NPC who allows you access to the altar on your back, and we'll maybe get into the lore reasons of that in a later video when the game releases. But this altar allows you to place little statuettes into it, with each statue granting certain bonuses. For example, the first statue I received, that of the traitor, increased my physical damage, and by working with the sculptor and giving them resources, you can unlock additional slots. And during my sit down with Enrique and Raquel, they gave me some further insights into the system, and this is the idea of resonances. This is a feature that the team is very excited about. Resonances can occur as a result of different statue combinations, and they are essentially a bonus effect that arises due to a specific combination of statues that you've chosen. So the team is excited to watch players discover these different resonances by trying out all sorts of combinations of these statues. So my first hour of gameplay was basically this. I chose my weapon, I fought the first boss, I went to town, I travelled through some sewers, I met some incredible and bizarre looking NPCs, all with mysterious dialogue and purposes. With the Ivy of Ascension unlocked, I then climbed high into the sky. It was in these rooftop areas that I fought the little skull lanterns and their stone sarcophagus guys. Finally, after struggling through this difficult area, I made it to an incredible sandy biome, and the background of this particular biome had great sand statues or people reaching out of the sand in the background. It was an incredible scene to end my 1 hour experience with. For those that were worried that the game is not as gritty, I can assure you it certainly is. I did some executions in the game and they are as brutal, if not more, than ever. We were treated to a couple of cinematics in the game and they were absolutely gorgeous. High quality, clean looking animations that really drew you into the world. Everyone I spoke to afterwards could not praise this aspect of the game enough, and I can't help but agree. The art direction continues to be some of the best in the business. Each scene is perfectly crafted to look like a painting. Carlos Viola's music continues to be a high point of the game, setting each scene and crafting an incredible atmosphere, and it was an absolute honour to meet the man in person. The combat is tight, weighty and responsive. The platforming felt buttery smooth, more complex yet more natural, even in that first opening hour. I just can't give the game enough praise. I got so much out of 1 hour, and yet I can tell I've only really scratched the surface of even the early game. These are just the notes I made while playing the game for an hour, so I can't truly tell how far and how deep the game will go. But from my 1 hour experience, I can tell you, this is Blasphemous, but bigger, better, and far more complex. It is a game where every detail, every music, every animation, the lore, the art, and level design is just polished to perfection and crafted by love and passion with a team that truly want to deliver the best game that they can. It's so refreshing and beautiful to see. With that said, let us now talk briefly about the lore that I witnessed while playing the game. So here is my clear warning for those who want to skip this. I will chapter out this section on YouTube, and so if you want to skip, I will see you again in the Q&A section that comes after this. Spoilers ahead. Alright, for those of you still with me, let us talk about the lore. Now, bear in mind, I only had an hour of the game, and Team 17 confirmed that they did cut some of the opening cinematics to not spoil everything. So I will give you a very rough impression of the story, based on what I can essentially remember, or that I took notes on while I was still playing the game. So yes, the game does take place after the ending of Wounds of the Eventide, with the miracle threatening to give birth to the miracle child. In response, a holy city has been raised up to meet the birth of the child, on the back of 3 giant statues. Enrique and Raquel did confirm that there was parallel development with the last DLC, Wounds of the Eventide, and Blasphemous II. So this was always in mind when developing the conclusion to the first game, so this is a natural sequel, with the story very much constructed with the conclusion of Wounds of the Eventide in mind. This city and these statues are something we do get to see in the concept art as well, and the main thrust of the story does appear to be around these 3 statues. The Penitent One has been resurrected in response to the state of affairs, the rising of this city, and is called upon to humble these 3 statues via various humiliations that are guarded by certain guardians, who are presented to us in a slideshow, clearly foreshadowing these as the bosses we will no doubt face. And these are the penitents that are displayed in this piece of concept art. And they do all have individual names and titles, and I apologise I wasn't able to take a note of all of them at the time that the slideshow was playing. But just know that they are all penitents and they are guardians of these humiliations that we need to humble the great statues that hold the city up. However, I did take one name down, the most important one, the guy in the middle on the throne, who really looks like an inversion of the Penitent One. This guy, I believe, is called Eviterno, Father of Penitence. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that the lore implications of this are going to be huge, and we're going to get to explore the lore of Penitence, which looks to be greatly expanded by an entire new cast of characters, so I'm really excited for that. But yeah, that was the main body of lore that I was exposed to. It's a direct sequel, and we will be facing off against this mob of penitents in order to humble the great statues. And again, this was only the opening of the game with some bits cut out apparently, so we're really only scratching the surface here. But I did just want to let you know what I experienced in regards to the story as I was playing. And with that said, let us move on to the final section of this video, where I'll discuss the developer Q&A that happened as well at the event. The Q&A session was amazing and was attended by Carlos Viola, the composer, Raul Vivar, the lead animator, Juan Miguel, concept artist, Raquel Alcazar, part of the production team, Enrique Colinet, lead level designer, and Enrique Cabeza, the creative director on Blasphemous II. So yeah, a really packed panel with a lot of talent. So a lot was discussed in this hour-long Q&A session, too much to be recounted here, but in general it talked about their processes and inspirations. And in this section I will include my questions, as well as the answers that were given by the developers. In some of these cases I will paraphrase what was said because a lot was said, but I will also show the direct quotes on screen for those interested in the full developer quotes. I first posed a question to Carlos, as I am a massive fan of the Blasphemous soundtrack, and I couldn't help myself. My question was regarding Carlos's process. I wanted to ask him, when does he start composing the music? Does it start at the concept phase, or does it have to wait until the game is near completion? Because I always find that Carlos's music not only fits the mood and atmosphere of the scene, but also matches what is going on screen. Carlos did confirm that it's an ongoing process, that it starts at the concept phase and he passes it over to the creative director, Enrique, to make sure that it is in line with their vision for the game. Finally, when the game is near completion and we can see what's on the screen, Carlos will make some tweaks here and there, and when they are happy it matches with the action on the screen, they then go to actually record and compose the soundtrack. So yeah, some lovely little facts there about Carlos's process, as the music does always fit with what's happening on the screen. The next question I had was directed towards Raul, the lead animator on the game. I love how in Blasphemous the characters are all so well animated, not only because combat feels tight and responsive, but also because even in idle animations, the enemies, NPCs, and Penitente himself have such character, and I wanted to know if this was their greatest challenge, blending those two objectives successfully. Raul confirmed that this was the greatest challenge, and that they make this a priority when making the game, to capture not only the character of the world of Blasphemous, but to make sure the combat, part of the game's main focus, is tight and responsive. So yeah, props to the animation team. The art in Blasphemous is incredible, but it wouldn't be brought to life without the hard work from these animators. My final question was regarding the storytelling of the sequel, and if it would follow a similar obscure fashion, and this was directed at both Enrique Cabeza and Enrique Colinet. Both Enriques confirmed that the narrative would unfold in the same manner that it did in the first game, and this was great news in my opinion. I absolutely loved the way the game presented narrative in the first game. The second game will be presented in the same way, through symbolism, items, dialogue, and with a lot left up to the player's imagination and interpretation. The devs discussed how they loved watching the community dissect and construct their own theories for Blasphemous, and from my time with the game, I was entranced, and can reassure players that the feel of the story, as far as I could see in that first hour, is in line with Blasphemous 1. So good news there. There were a few other interesting questions asked. For example, one of the journalists attending asked what comes first, the character design or the lore, and Juan Miguel confirmed that the character designs do come first. He and the team will draw up some concept art of enemies and characters and bring them to the creative director, and at that point they can make tweaks to the character design so it fits in with the lore that they have designed after the fact the character has been initially conceived. But yeah, maybe at some point I'll revisit everything that was said at the Q&A, perhaps in a member's video. But in general, it was just a fascinating insight into their processes and into what we can expect for the story of Blasphemous 2. Overall, you get the impression that these are talented, dedicated team members, and each facet of the game has talented and passionate individuals overseeing it, which will generally come as no surprise for anyone who's played the first game. So yeah, the long and the short of it is Blasphemous 2 plays amazing. Platforming, combat, and atmosphere are all top notch. This is Blasphemous 1, but bigger and more ambitious, but with that same charm and style that we all know and love. I can guarantee that this is going to be a banger game, mark my words. It was an incredible event set at the Casa de Pilatos, a stunning palace in the heart of Seville. Getting to be in Seville and see the architecture and history that clearly bleeds into the game was an experience to say the least. Having a sit down with Enrique and Raquel was a privilege, and I just want to give them a special thank you. The Game Kitchen as a whole are incredible people with tons of talent, and having met such a creative and dedicated team, one can easily see why Blasphemous is such a special and unique experience. So thank you to the Game Kitchen. And I would recommend following the Game Kitchen Twitter as well as the Blasphemous Twitter for any updates from the team. I just want to give a final thanks to Team 17 and Game Kitchen for inviting me and organising such a great event. It is not often that you get to play a brutal 2D platformer in the heart of an Andalusian palace. At some point I may break down the gameplay footage and go into more detail of my experience, but I just wanted to get a first impressions video out there while my memory was still fresh. But if you have any questions here that you want me to answer based on my experience with the game, please leave them below. They'll probably jog my memory of other features that I played while in that 1 hour, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can in the comments below. Remember to subscribe if you want more information on Blasphemous 2 as it becomes available, and for when the game finally releases, when I will cover the lore, just as I did all those years ago. But until next time guys, I will see you at the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow. Take care and have a wonderful miracle.